So, you're American, and guess what? You're not welcome here. Surprised? Don't be. It's a hard truth to face, but despite America's global influence and the popularity of many aspects of its culture, not every country in the world is particularly friendly toward U.S. citizens. In fact, in 2024, there are certain countries that have become increasingly unwelcoming to Americans for a variety of reasons. From political tension and historical grievances to ongoing conflicts and visa restrictions, these countries are some of the least hospitable for American tourists and travelers. If you're an American, you might want to think twice before booking your ticket. Without further ado, here are the top 10 countries where Americans are not exactly greeted with open arms. Before we dive into the list, do us a favor and hit that like button to help us reach 5,000 likes on this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more eye-opening content like this. Let's jump right in. Number 10. Myanmar. Our journey begins in Southeast Asia with Myanmar. This nation, with a population of just under 55 million people, has seen significant turmoil in recent years, and as a result, Americans are not particularly welcomed here. Since the military coup that occurred in February 2021, Myanmar has been in a state of political chaos. The civil unrest, widespread protests, and violent clashes between the military and civilians have left the country deeply unstable. For Americans wanting to visit, Myanmar presents numerous challenges. The U.S. government has issued stern warnings against traveling to the country due to the unpredictable security situation, and the possibility of arbitrary arrests or detention of foreigners. Additionally, the healthcare system is extremely underdeveloped, and in the event of a medical emergency, options are severely limited. Even if you manage to navigate the complex visa application process, which can take at least 3 business days to process, what awaits you is an environment filled with tension and uncertainty. The U.S. has also imposed sanctions on Myanmar's military regime, further complicating the relationship between the two countries. As a result, American tourists are often viewed with suspicion and are far from being warmly received. Number 9. Yemen. Next, we head to Yemen, a country with a population of roughly 30 million people. Yemen has been in a state of war since 2015, and the ongoing conflict has devastated the nation, creating one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. For American travelers, Yemen is not a welcoming destination at all. The U.S. State Department has issued a "Do Not Travel" advisory for Yemen due to the risks of terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping, and armed conflict. The situation on the ground is dire, with infrastructure in ruins, limited access to food and clean water, and a general lack of safety. For Americans, obtaining a visa is a significant challenge due to the tense relationship between the U.S. and Yemen. Additionally, those who do manage to enter the country are likely to encounter hostility, fueled in part by perceptions of American involvement in the region's conflicts, particularly the use of drone strikes. For these reasons, Yemen remains one of the most unwelcoming countries for American tourists. Number 8. Somalia. Somalia is another nation where Americans aren't exactly embraced with open arms. With a population of around 15 million people, Somalia has been plagued by political instability and the ongoing threat of terrorism, particularly from the militant group Al-Shabaab. In 2022, U.S. President Joe Biden approved the redeployment of U.S. troops to Somalia, aimed at assisting in the fight against Al-Shabaab. While this might be a strategic military move, it certainly hasn't made Americans more welcome in the country. The visa process for Americans is notoriously difficult, and even if you manage to secure one, Somalia's security situation remains extremely dangerous. Foreigners, especially Americans, are at risk of kidnapping, and the general environment is one of suspicion and hostility. Combined with the lack of basic services and the ongoing violence, Somalia is far from being a safe or welcoming destination for U.S. citizens. Number 7. Venezuela. Venezuela, with a population of over 28 million people, has had a strained relationship with the U.S. for years. Economic sanctions, political disputes, and mutual distrust have soured relations between the two nations, making it a difficult place for Americans to visit in 2024. Since the economic collapse of Venezuela in recent years, the country has experienced mass emigration, with over 7.7 million Venezuelans fleeing the country. The economic crisis, combined with political instability, has made it a challenging environment for any foreigner, particularly Americans. The visa process for Americans is highly complicated, and once inside the country, Americans face high costs of living and a difficult political climate. Despite having a small expatriate community of around 23,000 U.S. citizens, mostly residing in Caracas, the overall sentiment toward Americans is far from friendly, and tensions remain high. Number 6. Libya, with a population of roughly 7 million people, has experienced more political upheaval than most countries. Since the fall of its former leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, the country has been in a state of civil war, with rival factions vying for power. For Americans, Libya is a particularly dangerous destination. In 2012, the attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi, which resulted in the death of a U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans, was a turning point in the relationship between the two countries. Today, Libya remains under a "do not travel" advisory from the U.S. State Department due to the threats of terrorism, civil unrest, and the risk of kidnapping. Additionally, Libya's stringent visa requirements, combined with restrictions on entry for travelers with Israeli passport stamps, make it one of the least welcoming destinations for Americans. Number 5. Syria is a country that has captivated many with its rich cultural history, but in recent years, the ongoing civil war has left much of the country in ruins. In 2024, Syria is not a welcoming place for Americans, to say the least. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory for Syria, warning of the risks of terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping, and armed conflict. For Americans, the visa process is extremely challenging, and even if you manage to obtain one, the conditions in Syria are far from safe. Syria's hostile stance toward the U.S., coupled with the ongoing conflict, means that Americans are often viewed with suspicion, and the risks to personal safety are significant. Number 4. Afghanistan, a country of about 38 million people, has been a focal point of U.S. foreign policy for decades. However, in 2024, Afghanistan remains one of the most dangerous countries for Americans to visit. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4, "Do not travel" advisory for Afghanistan, citing terrorism, kidnapping, and violent crime. For Americans, obtaining a visa to enter Afghanistan is an arduous process, and those who do manage to gain entry face significant risks. Afghanistan is home to numerous terrorist organizations, and Americans are often targeted for kidnapping or wrongful detention. The U.S.'s long-standing involvement in the country, combined with the chaotic security situation, means that Americans are far from welcome here. Number 3. Iraq, with a population of around 40 million, has had a complicated and often strained relationship with the United States, particularly since the U.S.-led invasion in 2003. For American travelers, Iraq presents numerous challenges and risks. The visa process is complicated, and for those Americans who manage to secure one, the situation on the ground is fraught with dangers. The threat of terrorism, civil unrest, and violent crime is ever present, and the U.S. State Department has issued strong travel advisories against visiting the country. Reports of wrongful detention, torture, and the presence of various armed groups make Iraq one of the most hostile environments for American visitors in 2024. Number 2. Iran, a country with a rich history and a population of over 83 million people, is another nation where Americans are not particularly welcome. The long-standing tensions between the U.S. and Iran have created an environment of mutual distrust and hostility. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4, "Do not travel" advisory for Iran due to the risks of arbitrary arrest and detention of U.S. citizens. The visa process for Americans is long and complicated, and once inside the country, Americans face severe restrictions. Due to international sanctions, American travelers cannot use credit or debit cards in Iran, forcing them to rely on cash, which adds an extra layer of difficulty. The overall political climate in Iran remains tense, making it one of the most unwelcoming countries for Americans in 2024. Number 1. North Korea. Finally, we arrive at North Korea, a country with one of the most strained relationships with the US and a population of 25 million. Decades of political tensions, nuclear threats, and an ongoing war have made North Korea one of the most dangerous places for Americans to visit. In 2017, the U.S. government imposed a ban on American citizens traveling to North Korea, with very few exceptions. Even before this ban, the visa process for Americans was extremely difficult, and those who did manage to enter the country were constantly monitored by government officials. The tragic case of American student Otto Warmbier, who was detained in North Korea and later died after being returned to the U.S., is a stark reminder of the dangers Americans face when visiting the country. With strict surveillance, limited freedoms, and the ever-present risk of wrongful detention, North Korea remains the most unwelcoming country for Americans in 2024. If you're curious to learn more, check out our video on European cities that are ruined by immigrants, now playing on the screen.